Hey everyone, welcome back. We are just a few days away now from season 2 of His Dark Materials, so I thought this would be a good time to publish a recap of the previous season. I know that the last year has been long, it has been crazy, and my memory of what happened in season 1 is not as clear as it used to be. I'm going to go over the highlights of each of season 1's 8 episodes, point out some key plot points, and get you ready for Sunday. So join me. As you might expect, episode 1 was a biggie. We were introduced to not only our main characters, but Philip Pullman's world. Our main character is, of course, Lyra Belacqua, a 13-year-old orphan who lives at Jordan College in Oxford, England. The world that Lyra lives in is a bit different from ours in that humans all have creatures called demons that are kind of the external manifestation of their souls. And your demon takes the shape of an animal. Before puberty, your demon's shape changes at will. After puberty, it settles into one form and you can't change it. Lyra's demon is called Pantalaimon, or Pan for short. We are introduced to Lyra's best friend, Roger, who is a kitchen boy who works at Jordan College. We also meet Lyra's uncle, Lord Asriel. Lord Asriel is an Arctic explorer who's off doing who knows what, who knows where. Lord Asriel has come to Jordan College to pitch his new expedition back north and ask for funds. He brings photos of what looks like might be dust pouring onto an adult and a child. We also see a photo of a city in the sky. And most dramatically, he also presents a frozen human head, and he tells the scholars that this is the head of Stanislaus Groman, who used to be a scholar at Jordan College. The scholars decide to give Asriel the money for his expedition. He is happy. Lyra asks Asriel if she can come with him. Asriel says no, and then he fucks off and leaves her alone at Jordan, feeling abandoned and sad. We also meet the Gyptian community. The Gyptians are a distinct group of people who have their own customs. We see that one of the kids in the Gyptian community, Billy Costa, has been kidnapped, and we learn that there are children all over the country being kidnapped by a shady group very loosely called the Gobblers. And the Gyptians become aware of this, and they decide at the end of the episode that they are going to look for all the kids that have been taken from them. We are introduced to the Magisterium, the church of Philip Pullman's world. We're introduced specifically to Lord Boreal, who works for the Magisterium in some capacity, and Father MacPhail, who is of course a priest. Shortly after, we meet Mrs. Coulter, who is visiting Jordan College. She specifically wants to meet Lyra, and she asks Lyra, after telling Lyra that she is also an Arctic explorer, that she is looking for a personal assistant and would Lyra be interested in joining her in that position. Lyra is absolutely delighted, agrees, but says that she can only come with Mrs. Coulter if they also bring her friend Roger, the kitchen boy. Mrs. Coulter says no problem. The next morning, when Lyra is still asleep, she is awoken and told to visit the master of Jordan. When she gets to the master's housing, he gives her an alethiometer and says, "This is a very special, unique device. You must keep it secret, especially from Mrs. Coulter. You're gonna have to work out how to use it, but it's really important that you have it. Your father gave it to me and now it is yours." Lyra is getting ready to go, but she realizes that Roger is nowhere to be found and she does not feel comfortable leaving without him. And Mrs. Coulter says, "Come with me, I gotta go now. We've gotta leave. I will help you find him." In episode 2, Lyra and Pan head to London with Mrs. Coulter to move into her very fancy apartment. We also find out that Roger has indeed been gobbled by the Gobblers and is with Billy Costa. Mrs. Coulter takes Lyra to the Royal Arctic Institute to teach her things, to kind of acclimate her to the very fancy London social life of explorers and aristocrats that she belongs to. We also see Mrs. Coulter have a really complicated relationship with her own demon, the dreaded but wonderful golden monkey. The Egyptians have arrived in London and they are actively pursuing the gobblers so that they can rescue the kids. At the Magisterium, our favorite place to be, Father MacPhail is being told that he needs to rein in Mrs. Coulter. She is attracting too much attention. Lord Boreal crosses what looks like kind of a window in the air. He crosses from the Oxford that we've been presented in the first episode and second episode so far into another world. We can tell that it's much more familiar to ours. So we know that Lord Boreal is connected to two different worlds and he's able to pass through them as he wants to. Father MacPhail and his lackey, who has a bug on his face, visit Mrs. Coulter to tell her to cool it. Mrs. Coulter is in no way having it. She is not into this kind of supervision. And Father MacPhail happens to see Lyra, who's trying to eavesdrop on the conversation. After the fathers leave, Lyra and Mrs. Coulter have the most tense conversation. Lyra sasses Mrs. Coulter. As a response, Mrs. Coulter's golden monkey demon launches itself on Pan, and we see how much this physically hurts Lyra. In her passion, Mrs. Coulter also lets Lyra know that Lord Asriel is not her uncle, but is in fact her father. Mrs. Coulter has a party. She dresses Lyra up for this and tells her to be on her best behavior. Boreal shows up to the apartment looking mighty fine, and Lyra is targeted at the party by a journalist who asks her, you know, why are you involved? Do you know what Mrs. Coulter does? She is the gobbler's gobbler number one. The episode ends when Lyra decides it is time to book it, and she gets the hell out of Mrs. Coulter's apartment. She takes Pan, and we see her running around London until she is captured, and we see a net being thrown over her. Episode 3 starts, and we realize that Lyra is actually being rescued by the Egyptians who are in London. Mrs. Coulter, in an attempt to find Lyra, heads to Jordan College to shake down the Master of Jordan. Back in London, Lyra doesn't really trust the Egyptians, and she feels that she was a captive at Mrs. Coulter's. Now she's a captive of the Egyptians. She stays with Ma Costa, who's Billy's mom. Billy is the Egyptian kid who was kidnapped by the gobblers in the first episode. Lord Boreal crosses over again into the other Oxford that we can see is in our world. He hires someone there to research Stanislaus Grimman because he feels like maybe Stanislaus Grimman also knows about the multi-universe thing that's happening. And we discover that in the other world, Stanislaus Grimman's real name is John Perry. We see Lyra's relationship in this episode grow with the alethiometer. She starts using it, she learns a bit more about it. The Magisterium and the police, though, are looking for her everywhere. They're searching Egyptian boats, there are helicopters, there are dogs. Lyra has to hide. There is a narrow escape and they do not find Lyra. Ma Costa finally tells Lyra that Mrs. Coulter is pursuing her so fervently because Mrs. Coulter is Lyra's mom. And Lyra does not like that news. Both of her parents are assholes. Both of them are pretty terrible people. And that's never good news. We see the Egyptians kind of cluster together in what is called a buy-in roping. That's a special Egyptian term that I believe Philip Pullman has created. The king of the Egyptians, John Fa, gives a supposedly rousing speech encouraging the Egyptians to come together, levy attacks, muster their men, and go north to get their kids back. They've been hit particularly hard by the gobblers and they want their children. The Egyptians decide to pursue this. Lyra shows Farder Coram, who is another Egyptian leader, the alethiometer, and he tells her what he knows about it, and she goes ahead and uses it successfully for the first time. Episode 4 is another biggie. It opens with us meeting Lee Scoresby, who is a Texan aeronaut who flies a hot air balloon. Around the same time, Lyra and the Egyptians also arrive in Trollesund, which is a port city in the north. They're there for supplies to talk to the witch consul, Dr. Lanselius, my namesake. Farderkorm wants to send a message to a witch he knows quite well, Serafina Pekkala. Farderkorm takes Lyra with him to Dr. Lanselius's house. They talk about the witches, and then after some gentle prodding, Dr. Lanselius gets Lyra to reveal her skill with the alethiometer and the fact that she has it to begin with. Dr. Lanselius knows that Lyra is very special and kind of hints at the witch lore around her. She has a destiny that the witches know about. It is a sign to him and to all of the witches that Lyra is the person they've been waiting for. Dr. Lanselius also tells Farderkorm and Lyra that if he could give any advice, it would be to contact Yorick Byrnison, who is a polar bear living in the town of Trollesund. He's an armored bear. Yorick would be a valuable asset to the Egyptians. Farderkorm and Lyra are curious about this. They go to meet Yorick. Yorick is not buying what they're selling. We also see Mrs. Coulter visiting the magisterium. She tells Father MacPhail and the cardinal that they're not actually going to fire her. They're going to give her more power because she happens to have Lord Asriel under her control because he has been imprisoned by the armored bears and she is controlling the king of the armored bears. We see Lee Scoresby meet Lyra. Lee, who's been looking for Yorick, finally finds him to help him leave, but Yorick refuses. Lyra ends up meeting up with Lee at a bar to talk about her plan to bust Yorick out of this bar situation and ask for his help. Lyra ends up telling Yorick where his armor is, and Yorick goes to the oratory to recover it. He is about to start killing the soldiers who are getting in his way, but Lyra pleads for him to stop, and he does. Lyra tells the Egyptians that Yorick and Lee have joined the team. She's kind of made that executive decision without informing the Egyptian elders. In episode 5, we finally meet Will Parry. He is not at all in the Golden Compass, but he does make it to season 1 of his Dark Materials. We see Will being bullied and harassed at school. Lord Boreal is sniffing around the Parry home, and he interrupts Elaine, Will's mom, asking her questions about her husband, John Parry, and saying that he and John are old friends. He's obviously lying, but he wants info on John, and Elaine is very visually perturbed. Elaine heads to Will's school. When they interact, we can see that she might have some mental health issues. Will is definitely her caretaker, and he's very used to kind of being her parent. The Egyptians are traveling north by foot and with sledges. Lyra tells the Egyptians that she has been told by the alethiometer that she needs to go investigate something in the next village over. Serafina Pekkala visits Farderkorm. She tells him that Lord Asriel is right. There are multiple universes. She is pledging her support of the Egyptians through Kaisa. He will be there to guide them. Lyra finally gets the green light to go explore in the next valley over, and with the company and protection of Yorick, the two of them head off to investigate what the alethiometer is talking about. Yorick and Lyra have a chance to bond. Yorick tells Lyra a bit about his personal history, about the Svalbard bears, about the island, about bear kind. He also talks about the differences in human and bear cognition and how you can trick a human but you cannot trick a bear. Lyra, Pan, and Yorick finally arrive in the fishing village in the next valley over and discover that the supernatural thing that the alethiometer had been warning about was Billy Costa, who's been severed from his demon. He's just hovering at the edge of death. We know now what it is that gobblers do. They cut apart children from their demons. Lyra and Yorick take Billy back to the Egyptians, and we basically watch Billy die in his mother's arms. The Parry's house is under observation, and Elaine knows it as well. We kind of get the sense that she's a pretty paranoid person, but we're also learning that she might have some justification for being this paranoid. Lord Boreal visits Thomas, who he's hired as his private investigator, kind of, and Thomas tells Boreal that Elaine's bank account is still receiving money from Stanislas Grumman / John Parry. The episode ends when the Egyptian camp is attacked by Tartars, and Lyra is kidnapped and taken to Bolvangar, which is Gobbler HQ. In episode 6, Lyra is at Bolvangar, and she finally gets to see Roger, who she spent all the previous episodes looking for. She tells Roger about the Egyptians who are coming to rescue the kids, and she starts devising a plan for the kids' escape. We see that the scientists at Bolvangar are measuring the kids and their demons for dust, and one by one the kids seem to disappear and they don't reappear. Mrs. Coulter lands at Bolvangar, and Lyra knows that it is time to panic. Mrs. Coulter, being the nightmare that she is, wants to see the new intercision machine that the scientists have cooked up. To do that, they need a fresh victim, a fresh kid to sever. So the doctors call on Lizzie Brooks, which is Lyra's alias at this point, to perform the intercision on her. When the procedure actually starts, Lyra is kicking up a storm. She's screaming bloody murder. She also says that she knows Mrs. Coulter, and Mrs. Coulter is her mom. When Mrs. Coulter hears this, she stops what's going on. She stops the operation, pulls Lyra out of the machine. Mrs. Coulter tries to calm her down with chamomile. She tells Lyra that dust, which is what they're actually studying here, infects adults with sin, guilt, and regret. It's not too late for kids, and that's why they want to sever them from their demons. Mrs. Coulter at this point asks Lyra for the alethiometer she knows she has, and Lyra swaps it out for a spy fly, which attacks Mrs. Coulter, allows Lyra to trigger the fire alarm. Lyra actually sets some real fires, and she gets the kids out of Bolvangar with the help of Roger. We also see Lyra and Pan destroying the intercision machine so it can never be used again. Luckily, right in time, Uruk, the Egyptians, and the witches arrive at Bolvangar to rescue the kids. We see them battling with the Tartars, and they end up burning Bolvangar to the ground. Lyra at this time wants to go to Svalbard to rescue Lord Asriel, her father, and bring him the alethiometer. She, Roger, and Uruk go to Lee's balloon, and Seraphina and the witches help him with the wind. Seraphina joins Lee while the others are asleep in the balloon, and they talk about the fact that a war is coming. Lyra is a big part of it, and as a result, so is Lee. The balloon is attacked by cliff ghasts, and Lyra falls out of the balloon. Episode 7 starts with Mrs. Coulter watching Bolvangar burn down to the ground, and with it, all of her life's work. Lyra has survived the fall from the balloon miraculously, but has landed in a bit of a sticky situation. She is found by Svalbard bears, and she's taken prisoner to Jofar's palace and thrown in the dungeon there with another person. He tells Lyra while they're imprisoned together that Jofar has always wanted a demon. Lyra uses that tidbit to go to Jofar and trick him. She tells him that she is Uruk Burnisson's demon. She wants to be Jofar's demon instead though, but she can only do that if Jofar defeats Uruk in one-on-one combat. Lord Boreal goes back to the Perry house. He invites himself inside so that he can harass Elaine some more and threaten her when she doesn't give him any information on John. She does not believe at all that Boreal knows John, and she tells him to get the fuck out. When Uruk finally arrives at Jofar's palace, Lyra tells him what she has gotten him into with the whole one-on-one combat thing, and he agrees to what he has to do. Jofar, in a departure from the book, let's say, takes off his armor, which is wrong, and battles Uruk inside, also wrong. Uruk pretends to be hurt, and that pretending allows Uruk to make the final blow, killing Jofar. We don't actually see any of the bloody guts stuff. We don't see that Uruk rips off Jofar's jaw and then eats his heart. It is the epic disappointment of the episode and probably the series, if you ask me. Uruk gives Lyra a new name. He calls her Lyra Silvertongue because she's such a good liar. We find out that the Magisterium is also coming north to Svalbard. Elaine is super freaked out by that weird encounter when Boreal shows up at her house, and to calm herself down, she goes to Will's school. He takes her home and they find that their house has been burgled. Will takes Elaine to his boxing teacher's house to kind of figure out what's going on, and he asks his teacher if Elaine can stay for a day or two while he takes care of some business. His teacher luckily agrees. We see Will go back home and he is interrupted by people breaking into his house again. He gathers his father's letters, which he assumes that they're looking for. And then Thomas, the guy that Lord Boreal hired, trips over Will's cat, and Will accidentally on purpose nudges him over the balcony. Thomas dies and Will books it. The episode ends with Iorek, Will, and Roger arriving at Azriel's lab on Svalbard. When Azriel sees Lyra, he freaks the fuck out and he says that he did not send for her. He is clearly very distressed until his demon, Stelmaria the snow leopard, notices that Roger is with Lyra as well, and that seems to calm Azriel down. Episode 8 is really the episode of Azriel. It opens with Azriel and Lyra talking about the alethiometer, which Lyra tries to give him, but he doesn't actually want. They also talk about their relationship and his failures as a father. We see Fra Pavel, who again is the Magisterium's alethiometrist, tell Boreal about the subtle knife and that Grumman's son will lead him to the knife. Unfortunately for him, Boreal has lost track of Will since Will has been on the run since he accidentally murdered Thomas. Oops. Azriel wakes up Lyra after the kids have gone to sleep, and he tells her the truth about dust, its connection to the story of Adam and Eve and physical sin, and the idea that it is infecting humans with evil, which is what Mrs. Coulter believes. Dust only begins to settle on humans after the start of puberty. Azriel doesn't want to perpetuate the notion that we as humans are born tainted, so he means to find the origin of dust and destroy it. Dust is what makes the alethiometer work. Lyra wakes up pretty soon after that and discovers that Azriel has taken Roger up the mountain for the conclusion of Azriel's experiment. We see the Magisterium finally arrive at Azriel's lab with Mrs. Coulter in tow. The Svalbard Bears battle the Magisterium soldiers on their way up the mountain to confront Azriel. While that's happening, Iorek goes ahead and takes Lyra as far as he physically is able to go, and then she has to go the rest of the way by herself. She gets there a bit too late, and we see Azriel with a very simplified intercision machine that he has to manually operate to sever Roger from his demon. Lyra sees the whole thing happen. When Roger and Celcilia, Roger's demon, are severed, there is a huge release of energy, creating a blast, a beam of light, and then the creation of a bridge. Right around this time, Mrs. Coulter confronts Azriel in the flesh. After sharing a kiss, he asks her to go with him into the New World to find out more about dust. Mrs. Coulter, as into him as she is, decides that she is not into his journey, and she says that her place is here with Lyra. Azriel bounces. When Lyra wakes up again from being knocked unconscious by the blast, she and Pan go to Roger's body and decide that the best way to honor him is to follow Azriel across the bridge. And since everyone around her seems to think that dust is evil, it is obvious that they should probably do everything they can to save dust. Will is on the lam. He is hiding from the police, and he eventually follows a cat into a garden and sees a window in the air that looks very similar to the one that Boreal was using previously. He walks through it, and we know that he is walking into another world. At about the same time, Lyra walks across the Bridge of Light with Pan, and the episode and season ends with us seeing the bridge, Roger's poor dead body, and we're wondering, was it worth it? Thanks again for joining me, everyone. I hope that recap was useful. I am so excited to dig into season 2 starting on Sunday, just a few short days away. I so look forward to recapping and analyzing each new episode of season 2, just as I did for season 1. Please feel free to leave me any comments, any requests, any questions. I love talking to you guys. So I'll be here. In the meantime, thanks again and stay safe.